Hey guys, so this is a video I've wanted to do for a while. Welcome to another episode of Sharam is outside, also he is Robe Guy. This is a video I wanted to do for a while. I wanted to talk about emotional fatigue, physical fatigue. This is actually, I want to make an online course about this, going into a lot more detail. But if you guys are interested in this topic, please let me know. It's just the idea that very much that we're emotionally tired a hell of a lot sooner before we're actually physically tired. Now, my personal journey with this is when I was a kid, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome after getting glandular fever. And to be honest, growing up at family events and stuff like that, especially at school, it was really hard. It was really hard. And I know that there are a lot of people who would watch this video and they're like, oh, it's chronic, like I've got chronic fatigue too. And I know there are some people watching this video like, you got chronic fatigue, fuck, you haven't seen my chronic fatigue. And I know it comes in a huge different variety of packages, so I'm not trying to say that all experiences are like this, but this is just my experience. There comes a time where you start to question it all. There comes a time where you start to realize that deep down, a lot of fatigue is almost psychological. And although people might actually have a condition, chronic fatigue, which is describing, it's like a symptom, you know, it's describing the symptom. It's you are chronically fatigued, you are chronically tired. Although there comes a time where it's that, there also comes a time where things are psychological. So I'd like to put energy, the things that I've really learned about energy, and I do want to make an online course around this. So if you are interested in learning more and a hell of a lot more detail, do let me know. But I would really put it into three different categories. There's physical fatigue or physical energy, you know, like our actual body, what we do, what we eat, all this sort of stuff. There's emotional fatigue, which is, that's what this video is about. And then there's conditions, you know, like, oh, you're sick. You know, you actually got a condition that brings you down. Now, we're not here to talk about physical fatigue, although I've learned a lot about, you know, I talk a lot about surrender, like storing emotions in our body and letting them be felt and stuff. I'll talk quickly about physical fatigue. I realized, you know, like growing up, I was a bit of a gym junkie. And if you ever follow me on Instagram, you'll see me posting a lot about gyms again soon because I'll be going back because lockdown is over, baby! But I realized, like, we store stress in our body, and I talk a lot about grief and stress and all this stuff on this channel. What I realized that I haven't been, in my own journey, I realized I have a lot of stress stored in my muscles, and it's like I couldn't run or I couldn't walk. It's because I hadn't processed all of this pain that I've been storing in my body, in my arms and in my legs and in my buttocks and in my back and all where I basically, it's like imagine, like in some way I never put down the weights, and no matter life was a bit harder because I hadn't put them down yet. Anyway, so there's that's physical fatigue. Conditional fatigue, I'm not here to talk about that. Everyone goes through a bunch of different stuff, right? Like if you, like, there's a lot there. We're not talking about medical stuff here. Emotional fatigue. Now, here's the thing that I think a good majority of the population are suffering from. Emotional goddamn fatigue. That is the talk that we have inside of our head. That is the wasted energy when we are trying to do something and there is energy pulling us back. So maybe it's limiting beliefs, maybe it's thoughts that we have that are like we don't feel good about ourselves doing something, or we believe we should be doing something different. All of this stuff, if your body is like a train that is going train, chugga, 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 chugga. What emotional fatigue is grease in the train. So no matter how hard, grease, like gunk in it, like stuff that slows the train down. You are the train. You are destined to be like fucking fantastic. You are this beautiful, amazing train that just fucking chug forward, chug hard, chug deep. But what happens is the fucking self-talk, the emotional talk we have, the emotional fatigue is the thing that slows us a good majority down. And I know this as someone who had been diagnosed with a clinical fatigue, and someone who fucking pushes himself to the fucking limit. Physical fatigue. Like, I'll work nights. I've slept like 3 hours now and stuff like that. Once you've once you've gone through and dealt with a lot of your emotional fatigue, you actually realize how much high functioning we are, and then you also realize what actually physical fatigue is. Physical fatigue is like when someone says something to you and you're like, yes. I would literally describe it as a delayed response. That is my experience of it. But, you know, there are other ways to describe it. Of course, there's a lot of other ways to describe physical fatigue. But, like, emotional fatigue is the big thing. So when I started working nights, I was working like 3 nights a week with my father at the Melbourne market, the Melbourne wholesale market. Basically, we'd be working from midnight till, well, like 8 a.m. or 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. Some really hard hours, just basically moving a lot of stuff, right? What would happen is I would go to the shift thinking that I shouldn't be working there. I would go to the thing thinking I should be working on the business or doing stuff like this. Now, what I would do is then I'd go home, I would sleep for a few hours, record, still just sleep for a few hours, record a video or create content or stuff like that, sleep for a few more hours, go back to the market. Pretty much just like fucking over my sleep schedule. But what I learnt was on those days where I was really mentally and emotionally struggling, so those days where I'm like, oh, I should have slept more or stuff like that, were those days where I had the hardest time. Were those days where I had the hardest time thinking, existing, even working there, or even producing or living during the day, basically like that. It was those days where I had those thoughts were the hardest fucking days. They were the days where I was most fatigued. Now, there's a story I have when I was an Uber driver that I want to share here too. That's really fascinating. It's really funny. So, what do? Like, if I've only had a certain amount of sleep and I need to operate through surrendering to the fatigue, I've actually learned, like, look, if I'm not going to get any more than this, I have to accept that this is enough. You know, like, I trust myself. I have this much sleep. The universe wanted me to get this much sleep. Clearly, this is enough sleep. It's not always, like, logically. You know, I have people telling me, it's like, you should sleep more. And I'm like, I fucking know, you know? I'm actually learning and working on how to try and... it's an oxymoron, but force myself to sleep. How do I lull myself to sleep in a quick, really emotional thing, like let go and surrender a lot of my blockages towards sleep? Can I just do it really quickly? Anyway, so emotional fatigue ends up being this thing that I reckon a good majority of the population of this goddamn planet confuses physical fatigue with. There is a fucking mental health epidemic, I swear to God. And I only know this as someone who's like coming out of it. You know, like you motherfuckers who watch these videos, I know this because you comment and you message, and some of you guys are having a hard time because you're learning how to surrender, and that's really cool. And as you do, shit comes up, you know. And I'll tell you that Uber story in a second. But like, some of you guys are like a fucking rocket, and that's what happens. When you're no longer holding yourself down, you're a fucking rocket. Like hearing the stories. I know Allison messaging me. I'm like, Jesus Christ, woman. Like, don't stop. You're having a great time. And some of you guys have just got healing to go through. You know, like, for example, me, I'm still working on healing my body. I'm still working on surrendering stuff, what happens in there. Like, you guys come to me, I know a lot of you guys come to me privately, you book a call for, like, relationship stuff, you know, and that's what I'm here for. If you haven't already booked your free call, you can book a call, world-class relationship dating coach, whatever. You know, what I really love now is surrender, because that's the shit that gets people the results. But what ends up happening, though, is, now I heard brain fart, right? What am I talking about here? Emotional fatigue, physical fatigue, all that stuff. Yeah, so I'll tell you the Uber story now. Basically, when I first came back from tour, when I was touring with another company, being Mr. Dating Coach Extraordinaire, I came back and I became an Uber driver. Because, you know, sometimes when you give up something, life makes you go back to where you once were good, you know? And I really liked physical labor, or really just getting to connect with people. And it was a job that really aligned with me. Now, this was a time before Uber stopped you from working more than 12 hours a day. Insane. And I, being Mr. Crazy Sharam, before I knew what surrender was, I was still just being Mr. Crazy Sharam. I would work slightly more than 12 hours a day. Now, there was this one time, it was called Australia Day. Good day, mate. Where you would, where the fares would be incredibly fair. The amount of time you'd put in versus the amount of money you'd get out was much more in my favor. And you know what? I think that's That's what you would do. So what I would do on Australia days, I'd drive the whole fucking night, right? I'd drive the whole night. I was usually driving during the day. It was a bit ridiculous. Now, it was around 7 a.m. that I was extraordinarily fatigued. And I pick up this guy. He's this really interesting guy. Very like, hey, what's up? Like, very casual, whatever. And he tells me he's in a band. And I go, hey, so what band is it? Maybe I know what you're called. And he goes, oh, Birds of Tokyo. And I'm like, I don't fucking listen to their music. My brain clicks. He's a big guy. I gotta be, let's switch on the charm. And I'm sure he gets that all the time. So, I make my general bad jokes. I'm like, oh, yes, so have you ever been to Tokyo? They're like, no. I'm like, why the fuck would you call it Birds of Tokyo? I'm sure that's the questions you get all the time. He tells me he's just getting married, and I tell him, I help people with relationships, and I'm really happy for him and all that sort of stuff. I drop him off at the airport. It's like 7 a.m. or 6 a.m., something around that time. I can't remember what time I said. At this time, the time has passed, because it takes a while to drive to the airport. And I've been driving for 13, 14 hours straight. I think at one point I would have had like several naps in the car. I don't think I ever got out of the car, but I took naps. I was exhausted when I met him. After that, I was the most awake I'd ever been. I swear to God. And I had been put through fucking hell that night. Not only was I drained, I was driving, drunk people around being like, wanna have Hungry Jacks with me? I'm like, no. I'm like, I'll pay you to have Hungry Jacks with me. I'm like, no. The most awake I'd ever been. And so then I realized that a lot of fatigue was emotional. Not just physical. Emotional. And sure, conditional. Because there's some people who've gone through some shit. Like a close friend of mine had a stroke recently. Jesus Christ. I know. She's fatigued. God, well, she is. Her brain is rewiring. So, what do we do here? What is the takeaway from this video? Well, first of all, surrender. If you don't know what surrender is, why the fuck are you here? No, I'm joking. If you don't know what surrender is, you're clearly new to this channel. Surrender is the incredibly amazing, life-changing process where you literally surrender to your feelings. Not to the world. You can if you want to. It's to your feelings. Some people get that confused. All I'm ever asking people is to feel their feelings deeply. I just want you to feel your feelings. I want you to surrender to what the fuck's going on. So in this case, if you are exhausted and fatigued, surrender to that feeling. Because what we do, once we fully surrender, we actually let go of our attachment to it. We gain perspective. It's like you finished watching the movie and you didn't realize you're watching a movie the entire time. Once the credits roll and you realize this was a movie, this was a story I was telling myself, you actually have the option to move on. So same thing with fatigue. Once you process the fatigue, you actually have the option to move on. That's the massive takeaway here. Surrender to that and realize that if you're feeling incredibly fucking exhausted, and I know there are some of you guys who comment and be like, yeah, but like, I don't feel that exhausted all the time. And I'm like, great, you did it, congratulations. I tell some people to surrender and they're already doing it. Either they've watched the video or life has brought them to it. All I have done is systemize the process. That is it. All I have done is systemize the process. That's the genius of Sharam, is I like finding better ways to do things. If you want to know, what is Sharam? He's a guy who finds better ways to do things, and I found better ways to exist originally I came to surrender because I was fucking depressed. I was working with people in their relationships. This was the one thing that was actually getting people results. Everywhere I go, every book I read, the words just kept fucking popping up to me. I had a mentor, kept popping up to me, even though that wasn't the one big thing he was saying. And now it's like it's like the sun. I've reorientated my entire universe around this. It's because no matter what, everything fucking keeps getting better. You feel the painful shit. You feel that painful shit that you haven't been letting yourself feel for a very long time. Eventually that passes and you gain a whole new perspective. Pain turns to good, good turns to great, great turns to fucking fantastic. And more importantly, while I think in another video I want to talk about the relationship between surrender and the law of attraction, because I know originally I was trying to figure out law of attraction and then realized that surrender was my missing piece. So it really does fit really intricately into that. If you're interested in that, please let me know. Comment it. I want a video on law of attraction, Sharam. You're the best. Please, please, never stop wearing a robe. But yes, I'm outside because my partner was like, let's have a healthy lunch. And I'm like, yes. And I was in a robe because I had only slept a few hours. So thank you so much for watching this video. As always, you're fantastic, you're brilliant, you're amazing, and also, mwah, bye!